My name is Leonard, and at 58 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I built my construction company from nothing, worked 30 years to give my family everything they needed, and finally completed a project that left me exhausted. I decided to drive up to my mountain lodge in Colorado, the place I built with my own hands 20 years ago, where I always found peace. But when I turned that key and opened the door, nothing could have prepared me for what I found inside. Where are you watching from right now? If you have ever felt betrayed by the people closest to you, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to share with you will make you rethink what family really means. Let me take you back to that Friday morning when I drove up the mountain with a light heart, completely unaware that my entire world was about to flip upside down. The drive up to the lodge usually took about 3 hours from Denver, and I always loved every minute of it. I was behind the wheel of my Ford F-150 windows, down just enough to let in that crisp October air. The aspen trees along the mountain road had turned that brilliant gold color they get every fall, and the sky was so clear you could see for miles. I had made this drive hundreds of times over the past 20 years, but it never got old. I found myself thinking about Sarah, my wife who passed away 5 years ago from cancer. She loved this place more than anywhere else in the world. We bought this piece of land when we were still scraping by, barely making ends meet. Back then, I was just starting out in construction, taking whatever jobs I could find. Sarah worked as a teacher, and together we saved every penny we could. When we finally had enough for a down payment on this land, we were so excited we could barely sleep. I remember the first time we drove up here to see the property. It was just raw land, nothing but trees and rocks and a view that took your breath away. Sarah turned to me and said this was where we would build our dreams, and we did. Every weekend for 2 years we drove up here. I laid every brick, hammered every nail, installed every window. Sarah painted the walls, chose the curtains, planted flowers around the front porch. Our son Marcus was 12 years old then, and he helped too, carrying tools and learning how to use a saw. Those were good years, the best years really. We would spend whole summers up here. Marcus would go hiking with me in the mornings, and Sarah would pack us lunches that we ate on top of the ridge overlooking the valley. At night, we sat around the fireplace playing cards and telling stories. Marcus loved those nights. He was such a happy kid back then, always laughing, always curious about everything. Things changed as he got older, of course. My business started growing, which meant I had to work longer hours. More projects meant more money, and I wanted to give Marcus opportunities I never had. I wanted him to go to a good college to not have to struggle the way Sarah and I did. So I worked. I worked hard, maybe too hard looking back on it now. But I always thought Marcus understood. I thought he knew why I was doing it. When he went off to college, I was proud. When he graduated and got a good job at a marketing firm, I was even prouder. When he married Jessica 3 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. I gave them money for their wedding, helped them buy their first house, and last year, when Marcus mentioned wanting to bring Jessica up to the lodge for a weekend, I gave him a spare key without a second thought. That was last year. I had not been up to the lodge much since Sarah died. It hurt too much at first, all those memories. And then I got busy with work again, using it as a distraction from the grief. But lately I had been feeling run down. The last project had been brutal, and I realized I needed to get away to find that peace again. The lodge seemed like the perfect place. As my truck climbed higher into the mountains, I noticed the air getting cooler. I passed the little general store about 5 miles from the lodge, the one where Sarah used to buy fresh bread every Sunday morning. The owner, Mr. Patterson, had retired last year, and his daughter ran it now. I made a mental note to stop by on my way back down. Then I rounded the final bend, and there was the turnoff to my property. The dirt road leading up to the lodge was bumpy as always, and my truck bounced over the ruts I kept meaning to fix. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made me slow down. There were cars in the parking area, not just 1 or 2, but 4 vehicles, all parked in spots where I usually left my truck. There was a black BMW X5 gleaming even in the filtered sunlight through the trees. Next to it sat a silver Mercedes SUV, and beside that, a white Lexus sedan. The 4th car I recognized as Marcus's dark blue Honda Accord. My stomach tightened a little. I had not told Marcus I was coming up this weekend. Maybe he had the same idea, bringing Jessica for a getaway. That would be nice, actually spending some time with them. But 4 cars. That seemed like a lot for just Marcus and Jessica. I parked my truck at the edge of the lot and grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat. The lodge looked good from the outside. The logs I had sealed 2 years ago still held their rich brown color, and the stone chimney stood solid against the backdrop of pine trees. The porch where Sarah used to sit with her morning coffee looked just as I remembered it. I walked up the 3 wooden steps I had built myself, my boots making familiar sounds on the planks. I reached for the door handle and noticed it looked different. It was a new handle, brushed nickel instead of the old brass one I had installed. Strange. I pulled out my key and slid it into the lock. It turned smoothly and the door swung open. What I saw inside made me freeze in the doorway. Everything was different. The furniture Sarah and I had picked out together piece by piece over the years was gone. In its place was all new stuff, modern and expensive looking. The couch where Marcus used to fall asleep during movie nights had been replaced by a leather sectional I'd never seen before. The coffee table Sarah found at an antique shop in town was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was a glass and chrome table that looked like it cost more than my first truck. The walls, too, had changed. The paintings Sarah had collected, including the landscape of the mountains at sunset that hung over the fireplace, were all gone. In their place were photographs in sleek frames. I stepped closer and felt my chest tighten. They were family photos, but not of my family with Sarah. These were pictures of Marcus and Jessica, their wedding photo, pictures of them hiking, a large portrait of them with a baby, my grandson, who had been born 6 months ago. I heard voices coming from the great room, the big open space with the vaulted ceiling and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley. I recognized Jessica's laugh, high and bright. Then a man's voice I did not recognize, deep and loud. A woman's voice, older, saying something I could not quite make out. And then Marcus, his voice carrying that confident tone he used when he was talking about work. I walked slowly toward the great room, my boots quiet on the new hardwood floor. When had the floor been refinished? I had not authorized that. As I reached the doorway, I saw them all. Marcus and Jessica were sitting on the new leather sectional wine glasses in their hands. Across from them sat an older couple I assumed were Jessica's parents. The man was heavy-set with gray hair and a red face, wearing an expensive-looking polo shirt. The woman was thin with blonde hair that was clearly dyed, and she wore enough jewelry to stock a small store. They were all laughing about something completely relaxed and comfortable. For a moment, nobody noticed me standing there. Then Jessica glanced up and saw me. Her smile disappeared instantly, replaced by a look of surprise and something else. Annoyance, maybe, or worry. Marcus turned to see what she was looking at, and when his eyes landed on me, his whole expression changed. He did not look happy to see his father. He did not look surprised exactly. He looked caught. The older couple turned too, and now all 4 of them were staring at me. The room went completely silent, except for the crackling of a fire in the fireplace, a fire burning wood I had chopped and stacked last summer. Marcus stood up slowly, setting his wine glass down on that glass table. His face was blank now, carefully controlled. When he spoke, his voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. He said, "What are you doing here?" I blinked, confused by the question. This was my lodge, my property, the place I built. But something in his tone made me hesitate. I said, "I came up to relax for the weekend. I did not know you would be here." Marcus glanced at Jessica, then back at me, the older man. Jessica's father, I assumed, stood up too, crossing his arms over his chest. He was trying to look intimidating and doing a pretty good job of it. Marcus said, "This is not really a good time." I looked around the room again, at all the changes, at the new furniture and the missing memories. Something was very wrong here. I said, "What happened to all the furniture? Where are Sarah's paintings?" Jessica spoke up, then her voice sharp. She said, "We redecorated. The old stuff was outdated." Outdated. She called Sarah's carefully chosen pieces outdated. I felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. I said, "You should have asked me first. This is my lodge." That was when Marcus said the words that hit me like a punch to the gut. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your lodge. This is my place now." I stood there trying to process what my son had just said. My place now, as if I had somehow given it to him, as if 20 years of my sweat and Sarah's love meant nothing. I said, "What are you talking about? I gave you a key so you could visit. I never said you could move in." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said, "You gave me the key last year. I thought that meant you were passing it on to me. You know, like a gift, father to son." My mind raced back to that conversation. Marcus had called me, said he wanted to bring Jessica up for a romantic weekend. Could I give him a key? I said sure, of course. I was happy he wanted to use the place. But I never not once said anything about giving him the lodge. I never even hinted at it. I said, that is not what I meant and you know it. Jessica stood up now too, moving to stand next to Marcus. She put her hand on his arm, a gesture that was clearly meant to show solidarity. She said, Leonard, be reasonable. You hardly ever come up here anymore. You have not been here in over a year. Marcus and I, we have been taking care of the place. We have been making improvements. Making improvements. That was what she called erasing Sarah's memory from these walls. The older man stepped forward. He said, I am Thomas, Jessica's father, and I have to say, I think you are being pretty unreasonable here. Marcus told us you wanted him to have this place. We have been staying here for 3 months getting it fixed up nice. My wife Patricia and I, we are retired now. We need a quiet place in the mountains. 3 months. They had been living here for 3 months. I looked at Marcus. I said, is that true? You told them I gave you the lodge? Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable for about half a second. Then his face hardened again. He said, you never cared about this place after Mom died. You were always too busy with work. Even when she was sick, you were working. You barely had time for her, and you definitely did not have time for me. His words stung because there was truth in them. I had worked a lot when Sarah was sick, but not because I didn't care. I worked to pay for her treatments, her medications, the hospital bills that kept piling up. I worked because it was the only way I knew how to fight back against the cancer that was taking her from me. And yes, maybe I threw myself into work after she died because it was easier than facing the empty house, the silent rooms, the absence of her laugh. But I never stopped caring about this lodge. Never. I said, that is not fair, Marcus. I worked to give you and your mother everything you needed. He cut me off. He said, everything except you. We needed you and you were never there. Jessica squeezed his arm. Patricia, the thin blonde woman, spoke up in a syrupy voice. She said, families should not fight over material things. You are a wealthy man, Leonard. Surely you can buy another property. Marcus and Jessica need this place. They have a baby now. Your grandson needs a good environment to grow up in. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. They were living in my lodge, the one I built, and they were telling me to go buy another one. Thomas nodded, his red face getting redder. He said, my daughter and son-in-law deserve this. You have had your time. Let the young people have their turn. I looked at each of them. Thomas puffed up with borrowed authority, Patricia dripping with fake sweetness, Jessica, her jaw set stubbornly, and Marcus, my son, looking at me like I was the enemy. I tried one more time. I said, Marcus, this lodge is not just a building. Your mother and I built it together. Every room has a memory. The porch where she used to read in the afternoons, the kitchen where she taught you how to make pancakes, the bedroom where we watched the sunrise on our anniversary every year. You cannot just erase that. Marcus shook his head. He said, those are your memories, Dad, not mine. My memories of this place are of you being absent, of Mom being here alone while you worked, of me being disappointed over and over because you promised to come up for the weekend and then canceled because of some job. Jessica added, you are being selfish, Leonard. Think about what is best for everyone, not just yourself. Selfish. They were calling me selfish for wanting to keep the home I built with my own hands, the home that held my wife's memory, the home that I legally owned. The irony was almost too much. Thomas took another step toward me. He said, look, we do not want any trouble, but we have been living here, making a home here. We have rights too. Maybe you should just let this go. I felt something shift inside me then, a coldness settling in my chest. These people, including my own son, were trying to steal from me. Not just the property, but Sarah's memory, my past, everything this place represented. I needed to know more. I said, how exactly do you think you have rights to my property? Marcus glanced at Jessica and she gave him a small nod. He said, we filed paperwork to transfer the deed. Since you gave me the key and have not been here in so long, we are claiming abandonment. Abandonment. Legal terms. They had actually tried to steal my lodge through legal means. I took a deep breath. I said, the lodge is in my name. You cannot just transfer a deed without my signature. Jessica smiled, and it was not a nice smile. She said, we have lawyers looking into it. There are ways. I looked at my son one more time. I said, is this really what you want to take from your own father? Marcus stepped closer to me. His eyes were colder than I had ever seen them, and then he said the words that I will never forget. He said, "What is a bottom feeder like you doing in my place, bottom feeder? Like I was nothing, like I was scum. The man who raised him, who paid for his education, who gave him everything I could, was a bottom feeder in his eyes." I stood there looking at my son and realized I didn't know him anymore. Maybe I never really did. Marcus's words echoed in my head. Bottom feeder. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, trying to make me small, trying to make me doubt myself. But as I stood there in the great room of the lodge I built with my own hands, I didn't feel small. I felt something else building inside me. Not anger exactly. Something colder, more determined. I looked at Marcus, at Jessica, at her parents, who had made themselves comfortable in my home. None of them looked sorry. None of them looked like they thought they were doing anything wrong. In their minds, they were entitled to this. They deserved it more than I did. I thought about Sarah. If she could see this, what would she do? Sarah was always gentle, always kind, but she also had a spine of steel when it came to protecting what mattered. She would not have let anyone walk over her family, or not. And she would not want me to let them walk over me either. I remembered a day 20 years ago when we were building this place. We had been working on the foundation, and I was ready to give up because the ground was rockier than we thought, and it was going to cost more money than we had budgeted. Sarah looked at me and said, "Leonard, we do not give up. We figure it out. This is our dream, and nobody gets to take our dreams from us." We figured it out then. I would figure it out now. I didn't say another word to any of them. I just turned and walked back through the lodge, past the new furniture that did not belong, past the walls that used to hold Sarah's art, past the kitchen where we used to cook together. I walked out the front door and onto the porch. Behind me, I heard Marcus call out, his voice mocking. He said, "Yeah, just leave. That is what you're good at, right? Leaving when things get hard." I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. I walked down the porch steps and across the dirt clearing to where my truck was parked, but I didn't get in the truck. Instead, I walked past it to the old wooden chair I had built years ago, the one that sat under a big pine tree with a view of the valley. I sat down in that chair, the wood smooth under my hands from years of use. I could hear them inside the lodge talking, probably celebrating that they had run me off. Let them think that. Let them think they won. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a moment. Then I started making calls that would change everything. The first call was to Robert Sterling, my lawyer. Robert and I had known each other for 25 years. We met on a construction site when I was building an office complex, and he was just starting his law practice. He needed affordable office space, and I needed legal advice I could trust. We helped each other out, and over the years he became more than my lawyer. He became a friend. The phone rang 3 times before Robert answered. His voice was cheerful. He said, "Leonard, good to hear from you. How is the mountain treating you?" I said, "Not great, Robert. I need your help." My voice must have sounded different because his tone changed immediately. He said, "What happened?" I told him everything. About arriving at the lodge to find Marcus and Jessica living there with her parents, about the furniture being gone and the changes they made, about Marcus claiming the lodge was his now, about them filing paperwork to transfer the deed, about being called a bottom feeder in my own home. Robert was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "They did what they tried to transfer the deed without your signature." I said, "That is what they told me. They said they were claiming abandonment." Robert made a sound that was half laugh, half snort of disbelief. He said, "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. You cannot claim abandonment on a private residence that is clearly maintained and has an active owner. And even if you could, which you cannot, the process takes years and requires multiple legal steps. They cannot just file some paperwork and take your property." Relief washed over me. I said, "So they have no legal standing?" Robert said, "None whatsoever. The lodge is in your name. You pay the property taxes. You maintain it. They are essentially squatters. I can have eviction papers drawn up by Monday morning. Do you want me to do that?" I thought about it. Eviction papers for my own son. It hurt to even consider it. But what choice did he leave me? I said, "Yes, do it. I want them out." Robert said, "Consider it done. I will also look into this deed transfer they mentioned. If they actually filed false documents, that is fraud. They could face criminal charges." I had not even thought of that. Criminal charges against my own son. but if he was willing to steal from me, maybe he needed to face consequences. I said, "Do whatever you need to do, Robert. I am not letting them take this place." He said, "Damn right you are not. I will call you Monday with an update. And Leonard, I'm sorry your son put you in this position. You deserve better." After I hung up with Robert, I sat for a minute just breathing. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, painting the valley in shades of orange and gold. Sarah loved this time of day. She called it the golden hour. I made my second call. This one was to James Hartley, a private investigator I had used a few times over the years when I needed background checks on potential business partners. James was thorough, discreet, and good at finding information people wanted to keep hidden. He answered on the first ring. He said, "Leonard, it has been a while. What can I do for you?" I said, "I need you to look into some people for me. My daughter-in-law's family." I gave him Jessica's full name, her maiden name, and her parents' names, Thomas and Patricia Crawford. I told him I wanted to know everything: their financial situation, their work history, any legal troubles, anything that might explain why they were so eager to claim my lodge as their own. James said, "How fast do you need this?" I said, "As fast as you can manage." He said, "Give me 3 days. I will have a full report for you." After hanging up with James, I made one more call. This one was to my bank, to the woman who managed my accounts. Her name was Dorothy Walsh, and she had been handling my finances for 15 years. Dorothy answered in her crisp, professional voice. She said, "Mr. Leonard, how can I help you today?" I said, "Dorothy, I need you to check something for me. Has anyone tried to access any accounts or documents related to my mountain property in Colorado?" I heard her typing on her computer. She said, "Let me pull up your file. One moment." The moment stretched out. I watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the thermal currents free and unbothered by human problems. Dorothy came back on the line. She said, "Mr. Leonard, I'm showing that there was a request filed 2 weeks ago to transfer ownership of the property. It was submitted with a notarized letter claiming to be from you, authorizing the transfer to your son, Marcus Leonard." My hands tightened on the phone. I said, "I never signed any such letter. That is forgery." Dorothy said, "I suspected as much. The signature did not look quite right to me, which is why I flagged the request and did not process it. I was going to call you next week to verify, but since you are calling me now, I'm glad I waited." Thank God for Dorothy's attention to detail. I said, "Can you freeze any further attempts to access or modify anything related to that property? Make it so only I can authorize changes and I have to do it in person with proper identification." She said, "I can absolutely do that. I will make a note in your file immediately. And Mr. Leonard, I'm going to recommend we file a fraud report with the authorities about that forged signature. This is a serious matter." I said, "Do whatever you need to do, Dorothy. I appreciate you catching this." After I hung up, I sat back in the chair and looked at the lodge. Through the big windows, I could see them inside. Marcus was pouring more wine. Jessica was laughing at something Thomas said. Patricia was examining something on her phone. They looked happy, comfortable, like they belonged there. They had no idea what was coming. I thought about the paperwork Robert would file, about the information James would dig up, about the fraud report Dorothy would submit. The wheels were in motion now. I had done what I needed to do. I could have gone back inside and confronted them with all of this, told them their scheme was falling apart, but I did not. I just sat there in the cooling evening air, watching the sun sink lower. Sarah used to say that revenge was not worth the energy it took. She said the best response to people who wronged you was to live well and let karma handle the rest. But she also said that standing up for yourself was not revenge. It was self-respect. I was not seeking revenge. I was protecting what was mine. There was a difference. As the sky turned from orange to purple, I finally stood up. My knees creaked a little, reminding me that I was not as young as I used to be, 58 years old, and my own son thought I was too old and useless to deserve the home I built. I walked to my truck, got in, and started the engine. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I could see the lights of the lodge getting smaller behind me. But I was not driving away defeated. I was driving away with a plan. And in 3 days, when James called with his report, and on Monday when Robert filed the eviction papers, Marcus and his in-laws would learn a hard lesson. That underestimating a man just because he was older, just because he chose silence over confrontation, was a mistake they would regret. 3 days felt like 3 weeks. I went back to Denver and tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the lodge, to Marcus's cold eyes, to Jessica's smug smile, to that phrase that kept echoing in my head. Bottom feeder. I had built a successful construction company from nothing. I employed 42 people who depended on me for their livelihoods. I had completed projects all over Colorado, from office buildings to shopping centers to entire housing developments. I had a reputation for quality work, fair dealing, and integrity. But to my own son, I was a bottom feeder. On Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was James Hartley. He said, "Leonard, I have that information you wanted. Do you want me to email you the full report or give you the highlights now?" I said, "Give me the highlights. I will read the full report later." James said, "All right, let me start with Thomas Crawford, your daughter-in-law's father. He is 65 years old, worked as a financial advisor for a firm called Summit Investment Group." Notice I said worked past tense. He was fired 8 months ago. I sat up straighter in my chair. I said, "Fired for what?" James said, "Embezzlement. He was taking money from client accounts and using it for personal investments. The firm discovered it during an audit. They fired him immediately, but chose not to press charges as long as he paid the money back. He did, but it wiped out most of his savings. Summit Investment Group also made him sign an agreement that he would never work in financial services again." My mind was racing. Thomas had been fired for stealing, and now he was living in my lodge trying to steal from me too. Some patterns never change. James continued. He said, "Now, Patricia Crawford. She is 62, used to work as a real estate agent, but has not sold a property in 3 years. Here is where it gets interesting. She has a gambling problem. I found records of her visiting casinos in Nevada and Oklahoma at least twice a month. She owes approximately $130,000 to various creditors. Credit cards, personal loans, and at least one loan from a pretty shady outfit that charges about 25% interest. $130,000. No wonder they wanted the lodge. They could sell it or use it as collateral." I said, "What about Jessica?" James said, "Jessica Crawford, Leonard, your daughter-in-law, 30 years old, worked for a real estate development company called Peak Properties until about 6 months ago. She was let go officially for downsizing, but I talked to someone who used to work there. Off the record, they said she was fired for trying to flip properties for personal profit using insider information about upcoming developments. So Jessica knew about property values. She knew exactly how much my lodge was worth, especially with the new resort development going in 10 miles down the road. I had read about that resort in the local paper last year. It was going to be a high-end ski destination, which meant property values in the area were going to skyrocket. I said, "And Marcus? What about my son?" James hesitated. He said, "Are you sure you want to know?" I said, "Tell me everything." James said, "Marcus and Jessica have credit card debt totaling about $75,000. They took out a second mortgage on their house last year and are behind on the payments. His job at the marketing firm is stable, but they are living well beyond their means. Based on what I could find, they need money badly. If they could claim the lodge and either sell it or use it as collateral for a loan, it would solve all their problems." There it was, the whole picture. A family drowning in debt, desperate for a way out, and they saw my lodge as their life raft. They didn't care that it was mine. They didn't care about the memories it held. They just saw dollar signs. I said, "James, send me the full report with all your documentation. I'm going to need it." He said, "Already in your email. And Leonard, I am sorry. Family stuff is always the hardest." After I hung up, I sat at my desk and read through James's report. Every page made me angrier, but also more certain that I was doing the right thing. These people had planned this. Jessica had probably been calculating the lodge's value from the moment she married Marcus. She married into my family, learned about the property, and saw an opportunity. The next call came on Monday morning, right on schedule. Robert Sterling. He said, "The eviction papers have been filed. A sheriff's deputy will serve them today. They have 24 hours to vacate the property." I said, "What if they refuse?" Robert said, "Then the sheriff will remove them forcibly. But Leonard, there is something else. That deed transfer attempt, I looked into it. The signature on the authorization letter was definitely forged. I compared it to your signature on file, and it is not even close. Whoever did this is not very good at forgery." I said, "What happens now?" Robert said, "The bank has filed a fraud report with the police. They will investigate. If they can prove who forged the signature, that person could face criminal charges. We are looking at felony fraud, possibly identity theft. This is serious. I thought about Marcus going to jail, my son behind bars. Part of me felt sick at the thought, but another part of me remembered him calling me a bottom feeder, remembered him trying to steal my home, remembered him erasing his mother's memory from the walls of the lodge she loved. I said, "Let the investigation proceed. I am not protecting anyone who broke the law." Robert said, "Understood. Do you want to be there when the sheriff serves the papers?" I thought about it. Did I want to see Marcus's face when he realized his plan had failed? Did I want to see Jessica's reaction when she understood she was not as smart as she thought she was? I said, "Yes, I will be there." At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I drove back up to the lodge. This time I was not alone. Robert Sterling sat in the passenger seat of my truck, a briefcase full of legal documents on his lap. Behind us, a sheriff's vehicle followed with Sheriff Williams at the wheel. I had known Williams for about 10 years. He was a good man, fair and honest, and he had handled a few situations for me over the years when we had trouble at construction sites. He agreed to personally serve the eviction papers, which I appreciated. As we pulled into the clearing by the lodge, I saw all the same cars were still there. The BMW, the Mercedes, the Lexus, Marcus's Honda. They were all still living in my home like they had every right to be there. We parked and I got out slowly. Robert and Sheriff Williams joined me. Williams was in full uniform, his badge shining in the afternoon sun. He carried the eviction papers in his hand. We walked up to the door together. I used my key and opened it. Inside, I could hear voices coming from the kitchen, laughter, the smell of something cooking. They were making themselves at home, completely confident that they had gotten away with it. We walked through the lodge, past the new furniture I hated, and into the kitchen. All 5 of them were there. Marcus and Jessica were at the stove cooking something together. Thomas sat at the table reading a newspaper. Patricia was chopping vegetables. The baby, my grandson, who I had barely met, was in a carrier on the counter, sleeping peacefully. They all looked up when we walked in. I saw the exact moment recognition hit Marcus's face. His eyes went from me to Robert in his suit to Sheriff Williams in his uniform. The color drained from Marcus's face. Jessica dropped the spoon she was holding. It clattered on the floor, splattering sauce on the new tile they had installed. Thomas stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sheriff Williams stepped forward. His voice was official, professional. He said, "Marcus Leonard, Jessica Crawford Leonard." Marcus just nodded, unable to speak. Jessica found her voice. She said, "What is this about?" Williams said, "I have eviction papers for all occupants of this property. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal." He handed the papers to Marcus, who took them with shaking hands. Jessica grabbed them from him and started reading, her eyes scanning faster and faster. Her face went from pale to red. She said, "This is not legal. We have rights. We have been living here for 3 months. Robert stepped forward now. He said, "Actually, you have no rights. This property belongs to Leonard Clark. He did not give permission for you to live here. He did not authorize any changes to the property, and he certainly did not sign any documents transferring ownership to you." Thomas found his voice. He said, "Now wait just a minute. Marcus told us his father gave him this place." I spoke for the first time. I looked at my son and said, "Did I, Marcus? Did I ever actually say I was giving you the lodge?" Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at the floor. Jessica said, "He gave you the key. That is the same thing." Robert said, "No, it absolutely is not the same thing. Lending someone a key for a weekend visit does not constitute a transfer of property." Sheriff Williams said, "Folks, I do not want any trouble here. You have 24 hours. I suggest you start packing." Patricia started crying. She said, "Where are we supposed to go? We do not have anywhere to go." I looked at her. I thought about the $130,000 she owed because of her gambling. I thought about Thomas stealing from his clients. I thought about Jessica using insider information to try to flip houses. I thought about Marcus calling me a bottom feeder while he lived off my property. I said, "That is not my problem. You should have thought about that before you tried to steal my home." Jessica turned on me, her face twisted with anger. She said, "Steal? We were trying to make something of this place. It was falling apart. You never came here. You abandoned it." I looked around the kitchen at the new appliances they had installed with money they did not have. I said, I never abandoned anything. I just did not know squatters had moved in. That word squatters hit like a slap. Jessica's mouth fell open. Marcus flinched. Thomas tried one more time. He said, "We can work this out. We can pay you rent. We can make this right." Robert said, "There is also the matter of the forged signature on the deed transfer documents. The bank has filed a fraud report. The police are investigating." All the color drained from Jessica's face. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at her. In that moment, I knew which one of them had forged my signature. I could see the guilt written all over Jessica's face. Sheriff Williams said, "If there is an active fraud investigation, I need to make a note of that. Who am I speaking to about the forgery?" Jessica started to speak, but Marcus cut her off. He said, "It was me. I did it. I forged the signature." He was lying. I could tell. He was trying to protect Jessica. Even now, even after everything, he was still choosing her over what was right. Robert looked at me. I could tell he did not believe Marcus either, but I just shook my head slightly. Let the police investigation sort out who actually did it. The truth would come out eventually. Sheriff Williams made a note in his notebook. He said, "Well, that is a matter for the detectives. Right now, my job is to make sure you folks understand you need to be out of here by this time tomorrow. Can you do that peacefully?" Marcus looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in days. I saw something in his eyes then. Maybe regret. Maybe shame. Maybe just fear of the consequences he was facing. He said, "Dad, I didn't mean for it to go this far." I said, "What did you mean, Marcus? What was your plan here?" He didn't answer. Jessica did. She said, "The plan was for you to not notice. You never came here anyway. We figured you would just let it go." I shook my head. I said, "You figured wrong." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the lodge, back to my truck. Robert and Sheriff Williams followed after a moment. As we drove away, I saw Marcus standing on the porch watching us go. He looked lost. Good. Maybe he needed to be lost for a while. Maybe that was the only way he would find his way back to being the person I raised him to be. The next 24 hours were quiet. I stayed at a hotel in town, not wanting to be at the lodge while they packed up. Robert called me twice to update me. He said they were cooperating, loading their belongings into their cars, preparing to leave. No drama, no resistance, just defeat. At 2 o'clock the next day, exactly 24 hours after the eviction papers were served, I drove back up to the lodge. This time I was alone. Robert had offered to come with me, but I told him I needed to do this by myself. The clearing was empty when I arrived. All the cars were gone. The BMW, the Mercedes, the Lexus, the Honda, all of it. The only sound was the wind in the pine trees and a bird singing somewhere nearby. I got out of my truck and walked slowly to the lodge. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. They had taken all the new furniture with them, which was fine by me. I never wanted to see that leather sectional or glass table again. The rooms looked bare, now empty, but at least they were mine again. I walked through each space, checking for damage, seeing what they had left behind. In the great room, I found something that made me stop. Propped against the wall was Sarah's painting, the landscape of the mountains at sunset, the one I thought they had gotten rid of. They had not thrown it away after all. They had just stored it somewhere, and now they had left it here for me to find. I picked up the painting and hung it back over the fireplace where it belonged. Sarah smiled at me from my memory, and I could almost hear her saying, "See, I told you it would work out." Over the next week, I drove up to the lodge every day. I brought back the furniture that Sarah and I had chosen together. I had stored it all in a climate-controlled unit after she died, not able to bear seeing it, but not able to part with it either. Now I brought it all back. The couch where Marcus used to fall asleep during movies, the coffee table Sarah found at the antique shop, the rocking chair she sat in to read. Every piece back where it belonged. I repainted the walls in the colors Sarah had picked. I hung her other paintings and photographs. I even found the old curtains in storage and put those back up too. Slowly, day by day, I erased the changes Marcus and Jessica had made and brought Sarah's memory back home. It was hard work, and I was not as young as I used to be. My back ached every night. My knees complained every morning, but it felt good. It felt right, like I was healing something that had been broken. On one of those days while I was painting the bedroom, I heard a vehicle pull up outside. My first thought was that Marcus had come back, maybe to apologize, maybe to try one more time to claim what was not his. but when I looked out the window, I did not recognize the truck. I went outside and found an older couple standing in the clearing, looking at the lodge with appreciation. The man was probably 70 years old, tall and thin, with white hair and kind eyes. The woman was shorter, round-faced with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. They both wore hiking boots and carried walking sticks. The man saw me and raised his hand in greeting. He said, "Sorry to bother you. We were just hiking the trail that runs past your property and wanted to tell you how beautiful your lodge is. We have been coming up here for years and always admired it." I walked over to them. I said, "Thank you. I built it myself about 20 years ago." The woman's face lit up. She said, "You built this. That is wonderful. I am Helen, and this is my husband, George. We have a small cabin about 2 miles down the road." We talked for a few minutes about the area, about the hiking trails, about the new resort being built. They were friendly and genuine, and I found myself inviting them to come back sometime for coffee. They accepted with warm smiles, and we exchanged phone numbers. After they left, I went back inside and continued painting. But something felt different, lighter maybe. I realized I had just made plans with new people, new friends. I was not just restoring the lodge, I was starting to build a new life here. That evening I sat on the porch as the sun set, just like Sarah and I used to do. I had a cup of coffee in my hand and the sound of the wind in the trees for company. I thought about Marcus, wondered where he was, whether he was okay, whether he had learned anything from all this. My phone rang. It was Robert. He said, "I have an update on the fraud investigation. The police have determined that Jessica was the one who forged the signature. They have enough evidence to charge her." I closed my eyes. I said, "What will happen to her?" Robert said, "If convicted, she could face up to 5 years in prison and a fine. The prosecutor is willing to offer a plea deal if she agrees to make full restitution and perform community service. No prison time if she takes the deal." I thought about my grandson, 6 months old, who needed his mother. I said, "I want her to take the deal. I do not want her to go to prison." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you sure she tried to steal from you?" I said, "I am sure. Tell the prosecutor I support the plea deal." After I hung up, I sat there watching the colors fade from the sky. Was I being weak? Was I letting them get away with too much? Maybe, but I was not doing it for Marcus or Jessica. I was doing it for my grandson. He did not ask for any of this. He deserved to grow up with both his parents, even if his parents had made terrible choices. I heard from Robert again a week later. Jessica had taken the plea deal. She would pay back the costs associated with the fraud investigation, perform 200 hours of community service, and be on probation for 2 years. Marcus would not face charges since he did not actually forge the signature, but the attempted theft would be on record. I did not hear from Marcus at all. No calls, no texts, no emails, nothing. Part of me wanted to reach out to him to see if we could salvage something of our relationship, but a bigger part of me knew that he needed to be the one to reach out first. He needed to understand what he had done and make amends. I could not do that work for him. As the weeks passed, I settled into a new rhythm at the lodge. I spent weekdays in Denver handling my business and weekends up in the mountains. George and Helen became regular visitors, coming over for coffee on Saturday mornings and sometimes staying for dinner. They introduced me to other people in the area, and slowly I built a community. One Saturday afternoon, Helen and I were sitting on the porch when she asked me about Sarah. I found myself telling her the whole story. About building the lodge together, about Sarah's battle with cancer, about losing her 5 years ago. I even told her about Marcus and what had happened. Helen listened without judgment. When I finished, she said, "You did the right thing, Leonard. Standing up for yourself is not cruel. It is necessary." I said, "Sometimes I wonder if I was too hard on him. He is my son." Helen shook her head. She said, "Being a parent does not mean letting your children walk all over you. It means teaching them that actions have consequences. You taught him that lesson. Whether he learns from it is up to him." 6 months after the eviction, I was sitting in the lodge reading a book when I heard a car pull up. I looked out the window and saw Marcus's Honda. My heart started beating faster. I had not seen or spoken to my son in half a year. I had no idea what to expect. I watched as Marcus got out of the car. He was alone. No Jessica, no baby. He stood by his car for a long moment, just looking at the lodge. Then he walked slowly up to the porch. I met him at the door before he could knock. We stood there for a moment, father and son, not speaking. Marcus looked different, thinner, tired. There were shadows under his eyes that had not been there before. Finally, he said, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him pass. We walked to the great room and sat down on the old couch, Sarah's couch, with a careful distance between us. I waited for him to speak first. Marcus looked around the room, seeing all the changes I had made, all the old familiar pieces I had brought back. He saw Sarah's painting over the fireplace. I watched his face as he took it all in. He said, "It looks like it used to, like when I was a kid." I said, "That was the point." Marcus nodded. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He said, "Dad, I came to say I'm sorry for everything, for what I said to you, for what we tried to do, for all of it." I waited. Sorry was just a word. I needed to know if he understood. He continued. He said, "Jessica and I have separated. We are getting divorced. I did not know she had forged your signature until the police investigated. I thought we were just going to claim the lodge through some legal technicality. I did not know she had committed fraud." I said, "But you were willing to take my property through a legal technicality. How is that better?" Marcus looked down at his hands. He said, "It is not better. You are right. I was so desperate for a way out of our debt that I convinced myself it was okay. That you did not really want the lodge anymore. That you would be fine without it." I said, "You convinced yourself, or Jessica convinced you?" He looked up at me. He said, "Both. She knew about the resort development coming in. She knew the property value was going to skyrocket. She presented it as this perfect solution to all our problems, and I went along with it because I wanted to believe her." I said, "And the things you said to me, calling me a bottom feeder, saying I was never there for you and your mother." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He said, "I was angry. I have been angry at you for a long time, if I'm being honest. But the things I said, the way I said them, that was not fair. You worked hard to give me a good life. You paid for my education. You were there for Mom when she was sick as much as you could be. I know that now." I said, "What changed?" He wiped his eyes. He said, "Losing everything. The house is in foreclosure. Jessica left and took our son with her. I've been living with a friend trying to figure out how I made such a mess of my life. And I realized that the one person who always tried to teach me to do the right thing was you. And I turned my back on that. I turned my back on you." We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in those colors Sarah loved. I said, "Where is your son, my grandson?" Marcus said. "With Jessica at her parents' house. They moved to Arizona. I get him every other weekend when I can afford the plane ticket." I thought about Thomas and Patricia drowning in debt, probably filling my grandson's life with the same toxic values that led to this whole mess. I said, "What is his name? You never told me." Marcus looked surprised. He said, "We never told you his name is Leonard. We named him after you." That hit me harder than I expected. They named their son after me and then tried to steal my home. The irony was almost too much. I said, "Marcus, I do not know if I can forgive you right away. You hurt me badly. But I appreciate you coming here and being honest with me." He nodded. He said, "I understand. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry and that I am trying to do better. I am seeing a therapist. I am working on my debt. I'm trying to be a good father to Leonard, even from a distance." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I saw something I had not seen in years. I saw the boy who used to help me build this lodge. The boy who asked a million questions and wanted to learn everything. The boy who cried when his hamster died and who laughed at terrible jokes. That boy was still in there somewhere, buried under bad choices and worse influences, but still there. I said, "Do you want to stay for dinner? We could cook something together, like we used to." Marcus looked at me with such hope in his eyes. He said, "Really? You would want that?" I said, "I think we have a lot to talk about. We might as well do it over a meal." We spent the next 2 hours in the kitchen, cooking the way Sarah used to teach us. Marcus told me more about his life, about the mistakes he had made, about his plans to get back on track. I told him about my new friends in the area, about fixing up the lodge, about learning to live with Sarah's absence without letting it consume me. It was not a complete reconciliation. We didn't hug. We didn't cry and promise everything would be perfect. But it was a start. A small, fragile beginning of healing. As Marcus was leaving, he stopped at the door. He said, "Dad, would it be okay if I brought Leonard up here sometime? I would like him to know this place, to know where his grandfather built something with his own hands." I thought about my grandson growing up without knowing this place, without understanding where he came from. I said, "Yes, but Marcus, I need you to understand something. This lodge will always be mine. When I am gone, I will decide what happens to it. It is not a bargaining chip. It is not a solution to financial problems. It is a home. Sarah's and mine. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded. He said, "I understand, and I will make sure Leonard understands that too." After he left, I sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The night was clear and cold, and I could see more stars than you could ever see in the city. Sarah used to say that every star was a memory, and if you looked close enough, you could see the ones you loved looking back at you. I thought about the journey I had been on since that day I walked into the lodge and found my life turned upside down. I thought about the pain of betrayal, the loneliness of standing up for myself, the slow process of healing. I thought about Robert and Sheriff Williams and James all helping me fight for what was mine. I thought about George and Helen showing me that new friendships could bloom even in the winter of life. Most of all, I thought about Sarah. What would she think of all this? Would she be proud that I stood my ground? Would she be happy that Marcus and I were taking baby steps toward reconciliation? I like to think she would be both. Sarah always believed in justice, but she also believed in mercy. I pulled out my phone and looked at the last photo I had of Sarah. It was taken right here on this porch, about a year before she got sick. She was laughing at something, her head thrown back, pure joy on her face. That was how I wanted to remember her. Not in the hospital bed at the end, but here in this place we built together, happy and alive. I realized that was why I had fought so hard to keep the lodge. It was not really about the property value or even about principle. It was about keeping Sarah's memory alive in the place where she had been happiest. Every room held a piece of her. Every view out the window was something she had loved. To let someone else claim it, to let them erase her from these walls, would have been like losing her all over again. Standing up for this place was standing up for her, and for myself, and for the life we had built together. A year has passed since Marcus came back to apologize. In that year, I've watched my son slowly rebuild his life. He got a second job to pay off his debts. He moved into a small apartment that he can actually afford. He drives up here once a month to see me, and sometimes he brings my grandson. Little Leonard is walking now, almost 2 years old, full of energy and curiosity. I've started teaching him the same things I taught Marcus at that age: how to identify different types of trees, how to skip rocks on the pond behind the lodge, how to be quiet in the woods so you can see the deer. Marcus watches us together, and I can see it hurts him sometimes. I think he is realizing what he almost threw away. Not just the property, but the relationship, the chance to be here with his son the way he used to be here with me. Jessica occasionally comes too, though things are awkward between us. She and Marcus are working out their divorce, trying to co-parent despite the distance and the history. She has never apologized to me directly, but I can see the shame in her eyes when we interact. That is enough. I do not need the words. Thomas and Patricia. I have not seen since the eviction. I heard from Helen that they moved back to Oklahoma to be near Patricia's sister. I hope they found help for their problems, but I do not spend much time thinking about them. My life has settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'm working less now, semi-retired really. I spend more time at the lodge than in Denver. George and Helen have become dear friends. We hike together, share meals, look out for each other the way neighbors in small mountain communities do. I have started writing down memories of Sarah, all the stories and moments I want to preserve. I want Leonard to know who his grandmother was, the woman he was never able to meet. I want him to understand that this lodge, this place we are teaching him to love, was built by two people who loved each other and loved the mountains and wanted to create something that would last. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on the porch and think about that day when I walked in and found Marcus living here. I think about the anger and hurt and betrayal. But I also think about what came after. The strength I found in standing up for myself. The friends I made. The slow healing of the relationship with my son. The joy of watching my grandson grow. If none of that had happened, I might have continued drifting through life, working too much, avoiding this place because it hurt too much to be here without Sarah. Marcus's betrayal, as painful as it was, forced me to fight for something. It forced me to remember what mattered. It forced me to live again instead of just existing. I do not know if I have fully forgiven Marcus yet. Some wounds take a long time to heal, but I'm trying. For my grandson's sake, for my own sake, and maybe even for Sarah's sake. She would want me to try. The lodge stands solid and strong, the logs weathered but sturdy, the memories intact. I have added new memories now, the sound of Leonard's laughter as he chases butterflies in the meadow, the taste of Helen's blueberry pie that she brings over every Sunday, the quiet satisfaction of completing a home repair project myself instead of hiring someone. I look at these mountains now and I see more than just beauty. I see the challenges I overcame. I see the strength I did not know I had. I see a future that is different from what I planned but still full of possibility. Sometimes the hardest battles are with the people we love most. And sometimes winning means walking away with your dignity intact even if your heart is breaking. But what I have learned this past year is that winning also means being willing to try again, to give second chances when they are earned, to build new relationships, even when old ones have been damaged. This lodge is more than logs and nails and glass. It is a testament to love and labor. It is Sarah's legacy and mine. It is the place where I learned what I am made of when pushed to my limits. It is where I am teaching my grandson about nature and patience and the value of hard work. It is where I found peace after the storm. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. I hope this story made you think about your own relationships, about the balance between standing up for yourself and offering forgiveness. Have you ever been in a situation where family tested your boundaries? How did you handle it? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about family resilience and finding your way through difficult times. Share this with someone who might need to hear it, someone who is struggling with their own family challenges. Thank you for listening to my story. I wish you strength in your own battles, wisdom in your choices, and peace in your heart. May you always know your worth and have the courage to defend it.